The family ultimatum. A groom faces an impossible choice between loyalty, love, and his family's shocking demands just a week before the wedding. I could barely believe what I was hearing. Just a week before the wedding, my fiancé's family had delivered an ultimatum that hit me like a punch to the gut. Either you cut ties with him, or the wedding is off, they said, pointing to my fiancé's lifelong friend. The words echoed in my head, bouncing off every corner of my mind that I watched my fiancé, eyes wide, struggling to respond. He looked torn, like a man caught in a storm he couldn't escape. I felt my stomach twist with anxiety. How could this happen now, with only days left before the celebration we had been dreaming about for months? The thought of the wedding being canceled, of our families clashing, of the tension spilling over, made my chest tighten that I tried to process it logically. Was there some way to compromise? Could the friend, his best friend since childhood, step back temporarily? But the way my fiancé's parents spoke, their tone hard and final, left no room for negotiation. The gravity of the situation pressed down on me. Leaving me almost breathless, I sat in stunned silence for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of the impossible choice in front of us. Loyalty versus family. Love versus appeasement. Friendship versus the wedding. Every scenario I imagined made my head spin. And the worst part? I could see the conflict etched in my fiancé's face, the silent turmoil of a man caught between two worlds that I had known weddings were stressful. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just last-minute planning or minor disagreements. It was a moral battlefield, and we were standing right in the middle of it. Unarmed and exposed, that I watched him pace back and forth across the living room, hands running through his hair, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something raw, vulnerable, almost desperate. Every step he took seemed heavy, weighted with the impossible choice laid before him. I could see it, the storm raging inside him, between loyalty to a friend he had known since childhood and the love he had promised me, the love we had planned this wedding around. I don't know what to do, he muttered finally, voice tight, almost breaking. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands, and I could feel the tension radiating off him, wrapping around the room like a physical weight. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but part of me was paralyzed by the fear of saying the wrong thing, of pushing him further into panic. That he glanced up at me, eyes glossy, searching, pleading almost. You don't understand. If I cut him off, it's like I'm betraying him. But if I don't, my family. His voice trailed off, swallowed by the impossible. That I felt my heart clench. I understood. I understood loyalty. I understood friendship. But I also understood love, the fragile, fragile kind that could shatter if left unprotected. I wanted to scream at him to pick me, to pick us. But I also didn't want to add to his guilt, to make him feel like a villain in the story of his own life. That we sat there in silence for what felt like hours. The unspoken tension thick enough to choke on. I could hear his breathing, uneven, shaky, each inhale a reminder of the impossible crossroads we were standing at. I thought about the months of planning, the laughter, the dreams we had shared, and I felt that dreadful, sinking certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again, no matter what choice he made. Every glance, every slight movement, told a story of fear, confusion, and heartbreak. I realized then that this wasn't just about a friend or a family ultimatum. It was about him, about us, about the fragile balance between loyalty and love, and whether we could survive the storm that had just hit us. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the invitations spread out across the floor, each one a silent reminder of the celebration that was supposed to bring joy, not heartbreak. The glittering images of flowers, the list of carefully chosen songs, the tiny printed details of a perfect day. It all felt so surreal now, like a dream slipping through my fingers. That I kept replaying the family ultimatum in my mind. Cut ties with him, or the wedding is off. The words echoed relentlessly. It wasn't just my fiancé who was caught in the middle. Now, I felt the weight of the decision pressing on me too. What if he chose loyalty over us? What if I lost the man I loved not because of a mistake, but because of the impossible expectations of his family? I thought about the rehearsal dinners, the joyful planning, the excitement that had filled every corner of our lives just days ago. All of it now seemed tainted, overshadowed by this looming ultimatum. Every detail of the wedding became a source of anxiety. What once felt like joy now felt like a ticking time bomb. Could I even walk down the aisle knowing the tension simmered just beneath the surface? I imagined the conversation I might have with him, the words I would choose, the way I would look into his eyes and try to convey everything without pushing him further into panic. But even that felt impossible. How do you comfort someone who is torn between two worlds, whose loyalty is divided between the people who shaped him and the future you had dreamed of together? I sank back onto the bed, covering my face with my hands. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, unbidden, but I didn't wipe them away. I needed to feel them, to acknowledge the fear, the hurt, the dread that had settled into my chest. Because this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about love, trust, and the very fragile threads that held us together. And for the first time in weeks, I wondered if those threads were strong enough to survive the coming storm. Even as I sat there, lost in thought, I could hear him moving around the apartment, pacing, muttering under his breath, each sound a sharp reminder that the decision was still out of our hands. I wanted to scream at fate, to demand that this nightmare be undone, but instead, I took a deep, shaky breath and tried to ground myself. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration, but now it was a test of love, loyalty, and whether we could withstand the impossible pressures that had suddenly been thrust upon us. The next morning, he tried to speak calmly, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. "I need to figure this out," he said, running a hand through his hair for the third time in 5 minutes. I could see the guilt flickering in his eyes, that quiet panic that had replaced his usual confidence. "I don't want to lose anyone, my family, you him. I don't know how to fix this." I wanted to grab him, shake him, tell him that he couldn't fix everything alone, but I also knew that pressuring him would only make it worse. Instead, I sat beside him on the couch, taking a deep breath, trying to steady my own rising anxiety. "We'll figure it out together," I said softly. "But you need to be honest with yourself first. What do you really want?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the floor, jaw tight, hands clenching and unclenching as though the decision itself were a physical weight pressing down on him. I could feel the heat of his panic, the desperation of someone trapped in an impossible choice. I care about my family. I care about him. And I love you," he finally whispered, almost pleading. "How am I supposed to choose?" We began to talk, slowly, carefully, about every possible compromise. Could his friends step back, even temporarily? Could his family see the importance of our wedding over personal grudges? Each suggestion felt fragile, tentative, and with every response, I could feel the tension ratchet higher. Every maybe, or "I don't know" from him made my chest tighten even more. And I realized that even the smallest misstep could set everything spiraling out of control. At one point, I suggested he write down all his thoughts, all the pros and cons, all the feelings he couldn't say out loud. He stared at me like I'd suggested something impossible, then slowly nodded, picking up a pen with shaking hands. I watched him scribble furiously, pausing to erase lines, to cross things out, to start over again. The physical act of writing seemed to be the only thing keeping him from collapsing under the pressure. Hours passed in a haze of discussion, contemplation, and fragile hope. I could see the conflict tearing at him from every angle, and a part of me ached for the man I loved, caught in a storm he hadn't caused. And yet, another part of me felt a cold, insistent worry. Would we make it through this intact, or was the wedding destined to become a battleground where love, loyalty, and family ties all collided? By the end of the day, neither of us had solutions, only fragments of hope and a growing awareness that the week ahead would test every ounce of patience, courage, and trust we had between us. And as I watched him slump onto the couch, exhausted and tense, I realized one terrifying truth. Nothing could prepare us for what was coming. I started noticing the little things first, the way he hesitated before picking up the phone, the subtle tightening of his jaw whenever his family's name came up, the nervous glances when I mentioned our plans for the weekend. At first, I tried to brush it off as pre-wedding stress. After all, weddings were supposed to be chaotic, right? But this felt different. The tension was like a live wire stretched across our apartment, and every conversation sparked it further. He seemed distant, distracted, as if carrying a weight I couldn't see. I found myself watching him, searching for signs, trying to piece together what he was hiding without even knowing exactly what to look for. One evening, as we were folding napkins for the rehearsal dinner, He flinched when his phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, seeing a name that made my stomach twist. I didn't snoop. I promised myself I wouldn't, but I couldn't ignore the sharp pang of suspicion that curled through me. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, casual, though my heart was hammering. He smiled, just slightly, but there was a strain behind it. Yeah, yeah, fine," he said too quickly, and I knew immediately it wasn't fine. The small lies, the half-truths, they were piling up like dry leaves, ready to ignite. I felt a knot in my chest, a mix of fear and frustration that I replayed every interaction over the past days. Every distracted glance, every hesitated word, every unusually tense moment. Had I missed something earlier? Was there a conversation I should have had sooner, a warning sign I had ignored? The more I thought about it, the more my mind spun, tangled in a web of uncertainty and dread. By the time I went to bed that night, I felt exhausted, emotionally drained, yet strangely alert. I couldn't shake the feeling that the real storm was about to hit, and that if we didn't confront it soon, the fragile world we had built, our plans, our love, our wedding, could crumble entirely. I knew then that waiting, pretending everything was normal, wasn't an option anymore. Something had to give, and I wasn't sure who would be left standing when it did. The next morning, his parents arrived unannounced, their expressions sharp, voices clipped with an edge I hadn't heard before. "We need to talk," his mother said, eyes fixed on him like a hawk assessing prey. My fiancé's usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by visible tension, his shoulders stiff, hands clenched at his sides. They wasted no time. "This friend of yours," his father began, voice low but authoritative, "he's unacceptable. We won't have him anywhere near the wedding. It's either him or the wedding. You know our position." I felt my chest tighten, the words slicing through the room like a cold blade. I watched my fiancé shift uncomfortably, swallowing hard, attempting to muster a response that wouldn't ignite further conflict. But it was clear, there was no room for negotiation in their eyes. Their ultimatum was absolute. I, I can't just," he started, voice cracking slightly, but his father cut him off with a sharp glance. "You don't get to negotiate loyalty, son. Family comes first. That's non-negotiable." I could feel my stomach churn, my hands tightening into fists. I wanted to scream, to step in and tell them to back off, but I knew their words carried weight he couldn't ignore. I felt the impossible pressure he was under, trapped between the love of his life, me, and the expectations of the family he had grown up with. His mother leaned forward, voice softer but no less cutting. "We love you, but you must understand the consequences of your choices. Do this one thing for us, or everything you've planned. This wedding, your future, is at risk." I glanced at my fiancé, seeing the storm of emotions flicker across his face. Fear, guilt, anger, helplessness. I wanted to reach out to him, to reassure him, but the tension in the room made words useless. The family's pressure was a living thing, pressing down on us from every angle. And I realized just how fragile our situation had become after they left. Silence filled the apartment like an echo of the confrontation. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered, voice barely audible. I sat beside him, letting him lean against me, feeling the weight of his anguish seep into my own chest. That day, I understood something terrifying. The wedding wasn't just a celebration anymore. It was a battlefield. And the war wasn't just about love. It was about loyalty, family, and impossible choices that threatened to unravel everything we had worked so hard to build. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his uneven breathing beside me. The apartment was quiet, but the tension between us was louder than any noise could ever be. I knew he was wrestling with an impossible choice, and every sigh, every twitch of his hand, every distant look told me how heavy this was weighing on him. I wanted to reach out, to tell him it was okay to feel torn, but words felt meaningless. How could I articulate the chaos of emotions twisting inside him? The guilt, the fear, the desire not to disappoint anyone while also staying true to himself. I watched him sleep, restless, tossing slightly, muttering under his breath, and felt my own heart ache. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "I can't hurt him, but I also can't hurt you," he said. His words landed like shards of glass, beautiful and painful at the same time. I reached out, taking his hand, feeling the tension in his fingers. The trembling of someone carrying a burden too heavy for one person alone. That I thought about the friend he had known since childhood. The shared memories, the laughter, the loyalty that had formed a bond stronger than most could understand. I understood that loyalty. It was a part of him. But I also saw the pain etched across his face, the fear that he could lose everything he cared about, including me and me. I realized how deeply this was affecting me too. I wanted him to make the right choice, but what was right? Love? Loyalty? Family approval? The lines blurred in the dark, tangled with my own insecurities, my fear of losing the man I loved, my anger at the impossible position his family had placed us in. Hours passed in a restless haze. I whispered encouragements, tried to be a steady presence, but I could feel him slipping between the edges of panic and despair. Every sigh, every shake of his head, every tear unshed reminded me that this wasn't a simple decision. It was a life-altering storm, and we were both in the eye of it. Vulnerable and exposed, by morning, he hadn't spoken much, and I knew the internal battle was far from over. He was torn in 1,000 directions at once, and I feared that any step in the wrong direction could shatter the fragile balance we had been clinging to. I realized that love alone wouldn't solve this. This required courage, honesty, and perhaps sacrifices neither of us wanted to make. And I felt a chilling truth settle in my chest. The next few days wouldn't just decide the wedding. They would define who we were, both as individuals and as a couple, and whether our love was strong enough to survive the impossible pressure bearing down on us. Later that evening, I watched him slip out of the apartment, phone clutched tightly in his hand, and my stomach twisted with dread. He said he needed to talk to his friend, but I knew it wasn't a casual conversation. I followed discreetly, staying just far enough behind to see without being seen, my mind racing with questions. What could they possibly be discussing at a time like this? Could there be a way out, or was the situation about to explode? They met in a quiet corner of a nearby park, shadows stretching long across the pavement in the fading light. I couldn't hear everything, but I could see the intensity in their gestures, the sharp exchanges, the tension that seemed almost physical. My fiancé's shoulders were rigid. His head bowed at times, then lifted in defiance, eyes searching the friend's face for understanding. "I can't just cut you out," he said, voice low but strained. "You know that. We've been through too much together. But my family, they've drawn a line in the sand. I don't know how to fix this without losing everything." The friend's expression hardened, a mixture of frustration and concern. "You're letting them control your life?" he snapped. "They can't dictate who you're friends with. Don't throw away years of loyalty for some arbitrary demand. You know me. I've always been there for you." I felt a pang of helplessness watching them. I wanted to step in, to calm everything, but I also knew that whatever decision was being wrestled over in that dim park would impact the wedding, our love, and the fragile trust we had built. I could see my fiancé's internal struggle in every hesitation, every pause, every flicker of emotion crossing his face. I just don't want to hurt anyone," he said finally, almost pleading. His voice cracked slightly, and I felt my heart squeeze. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a tangible force, and I could feel my own anxiety spike in sympathy. The friend softened slightly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then make the choice that feels right for you," he said quietly, "not the one that keeps everyone else comfortable. If you betray yourself, you'll regret it forever." I watched them talk for what felt like hours, the conversation a delicate dance of loyalty, fear, and honesty. When my fiancé finally returned, his face was pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But there was a flicker of resolve there too, a quiet, tentative determination that he was beginning to navigate the impossible. As he walked back toward the apartment, I realized that this wasn't just a test of friendship or family loyalty. It was a crucible for our love. How we survived these final days before the wedding would define everything. And in that moment, I understood that the storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. By midweek, the tension had become unbearable. I could feel it in every glance, every word, every forced smile. The apartment felt smaller somehow, the air thicker, heavy with unsaid thoughts and unspoken anger. And then it happened, the confrontation I had been dreading, the moment when the pressure finally erupted. His mother stormed in, eyes blazing. her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I cannot believe you're still entertaining the idea of keeping him in your life, she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. I flinched, my stomach twisting, heart pounding, as I saw the fury in my fiancé's eyes flare like wildfire. I'm not trying to defy you, he shouted back, voice cracking. I'm just trying to figure out how to survive this without destroying everything. You think it's easy to choose between family and a friendship that's lasted my whole life? I felt my hands tremble, my chest tightening. The shouting, the anger, the raw emotion. It was like standing in the middle of a storm that refused to relent. I wanted to step in, to calm everyone down, but I knew that this was a moment that could not be softened with gentle words. The truth, finally, had to come out. His father slammed a hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You are being foolish. Do you have any idea what you're risking? The wedding, your future, this entire family's respect. I know exactly what I'm risking, he yelled back, his voice thick with frustration and desperation. But I can't just erase years of friendship because you suddenly demand it. You want me to betray someone I care about? How is that fair? How is that even right? I sat frozen, listening, heart in my throat. The room felt electric, charged with raw emotion, and I could see tears brimming in his eyes. I wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but I also felt the impossibility of the situation pressing down on all of us. The wedding, the love, the friendships, the family expectations, it was all colliding in a way that felt catastrophic. Finally, in a quiet moment between shouts, I spoke, my voice trembling. Stop, please, I said, my words small but cutting through the tension like a blade. This isn't helping anyone. We're all hurting, and yelling won't fix it. Please, just stop. The room went silent for a heartbeat, then another. I looked at him, his face streaked with frustration and exhaustion, eyes wild with the weight of impossible choices. I knew in that moment that nothing would be simple. The decisions ahead would shape not just the wedding, but our lives. And I also realized, with a sinking certainty, that the next week would push all of us to the edge, testing loyalties, love, and endurance in ways none of us could have anticipated. After that explosive confrontation, everything felt different. I noticed it immediately. The way he hesitated before answering me, the subtle distance in his eyes, the tension coiled tight around his shoulders like a wire ready to snap. I felt it in my chest too, an ache that settled deep, twisting with worry, frustration, and a quiet fear I couldn't shake that I replayed every interaction over the past few days. The small signs I had dismissed, the flinches, the half-truths, the silence during moments when we should have been laughing, now screamed at me with clarity. Something was breaking between us, and I could feel it, like cracks spreading across the foundation of everything we had built. Even simple conversations became minefields. I tried to ask how he was feeling, how he was handling the pressure from his family, but every answer felt guarded, measured, like he was holding back a part of himself to protect me, or perhaps to protect his own fragile sense of control. I felt a pang of helplessness. How could I reach him when the walls between us were rising faster than we could tear them down? I thought about the wedding, the flowers, the vows, the music, the excitement we had dreamed about for months. Suddenly, it all seemed fragile, like a delicate vase teetering on the edge of a table. One wrong move, one misstep, and it could shatter completely. I couldn't ignore the thought that this conflict, this ultimatum, was changing him, changing us. And yet, despite the fear, despite the tension, I wanted to believe we could survive this. I reminded myself that love wasn't just about perfect moments. It was about enduring storms together, about finding strength in the cracks. But even as I clung to that hope, I couldn't stop the sinking dread that maybe some cracks were too deep to mend. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I reached out, trying to bridge the distance that had formed. He took my hand, squeezing it gently, and I felt a small flicker of connection. But even then, I knew it was fragile. The family's ultimatum wasn't just a single moment. It was a shadow over every interaction. A reminder that the next week would demand choices and sacrifices that could define the rest of our lives. And so I lay there, heart racing, mind spinning, caught between hope and fear, wondering if love would be enough to hold us together when everything around us seemed determined to tear us apart. The next day brought a storm I hadn't anticipated. My fiancé and his friend met again, this time with a tension so thick I could almost feel it in the air around me. I watched from a distance, pretending to busy myself with wedding details. But my ears were attuned to every word, every sigh, every pause that carried the weight of unspoken emotions. "I don't want to lose you as a friend," he said, voice low, almost trembling. "But my family, they're threatening everything I've worked for, everything I love." The friend's expression hardened, a mixture of frustration and hurt flashing across his features. "And you think cutting me out is the answer? You think betraying our friendship will make them happy? You know that won't fix anything, not really. You'll regret it." I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anxiety and empathy twisting inside me. I understood the loyalty, the years of shared memories, the unspoken bond that had been forged over a lifetime. But I also understood the gravity of the ultimatum. One wrong move, one decision made from fear rather than heart, could destroy everything: the wedding, our relationship, and possibly even his sense of self. That I could see him struggle visibly, shoulders slumping, hands clenching and unclenching, every muscle in his body taut with indecision. I imagined the nights he must have spent tossing and turning, weighing loyalty against love, the voices of family and friend battling inside his head. And I realized how isolating this must feel for him, how suffocating it must be to bear this burden alone. Finally, he spoke again, voice cracking. I, I can't just abandon you. I won't. But I also can't let my family dictate my life. I don't know what to do." The friend's eyes softened, but there was still that hard edge, the same one I had seen in our living room confrontation days ago. "Then make a choice that's yours, not theirs," he said quietly. "Don't lose yourself trying to please everyone." I watched the scene unfold, my mind racing. I wanted to intervene, to offer advice, to remind him that I was here, that I loved him, but I knew this was his crucible. And in that moment, I felt a wave of fear and hope collide. Fear that the wrong choice could shatter everything, and hope that he would find the courage to navigate this impossible terrain without losing himself or us. As they parted ways, I saw him slump, exhausted but determined, a mixture of relief and dread in his eyes. I knew the battle wasn't over, it was only getting fiercer. Loyalty and love, family and friendship, all were being tested in ways none of us could have anticipated. And I braced myself, knowing that the coming days would decide not just the wedding, but the foundation of everything we were building together. That night, I sat alone in the dim glow of the living room. The invitations, decorations, and tiny trinkets we had painstakingly chosen now scattered around me like fragments of a dream I wasn't sure we could realize. My mind raced with endless possibilities, each scenario more terrifying than the last. What if he chose loyalty over us? What if his family's ultimatum tore us apart? What if the friend walked away, feeling betrayed, leaving scars that would never heal? I tried to visualize the wedding day, but every image was tainted by uncertainty. I imagined walking down the aisle, smiling, while beneath the surface, a storm brewed between those I loved most. I pictured the whispered arguments, the cold stares, the regret simmering behind polite smiles. Each vision made my stomach twist, each potential outcome a fresh pang of anxiety. I thought about the conversations we had had with his family, the confrontations, the shouting, the desperate pleas. I realized that there was no way to please everyone, no magic solution that would smooth out the impossible tension. And yet, I couldn't let myself give up hope entirely. Hope had to exist somewhere, even if fragile, even if fleeting. That I ran through every possible choice he could make, weighing them in my mind. Could he cut his friend off, even temporarily, to appease his family? Could he confront them, set boundaries, and risk their wrath? Could we somehow find a compromise that didn't demand betrayal of anyone? Each option felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of sharp, unseen consequences. And then there was me. What was my role in all this? Could I support him without losing myself? Could I stand by him if the choices he made hurt those I cared about, or even hurt me? My heart ached at the thought that love alone might not be enough to navigate this labyrinth of loyalty, fear, and expectation. By the time I finally lay down, eyes heavy with exhaustion, my mind was still spinning, trapped in a loop of what-ifs. Sleep came only in fits and starts, haunted by imagined confrontations, failed compromises, and the possibility of heartbreak on the horizon. I realized, with a sinking clarity, that the coming days would test not just him, not just me, but us together. Every decision, every word, every silent hesitation would ripple outward, shaping the future we had dared to dream. And in the quiet moments, when I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it, I understood something terrifying. Love, even at its strongest, would be stretched to the breaking point, and only courage, honesty, and endurance could hold it together. It happened late that evening, when I least expected it. I had been sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wedding planning binder, trying to make sense of a week that had spun entirely out of control. The sound of his phone buzzing made my heart jump again. But this time, he didn't flinch, didn't hide anything. Instead, he looked at me with a strange, almost guilty resolve. "I have to tell you something," he said, voice low, hesitant, yet heavy with urgency. My stomach dropped. I had braced myself for confrontation, for another fight. But what came next was something I hadn't imagined. He revealed a secret, something I hadn't known, something that would change everything. His family's ultimatum was not just about loyalty. It was tangled with past mistakes, misunderstandings, and a truth that had been kept hidden for years. He explained the full story, the reasons behind the sudden pressure, the secrets that had been whispered behind closed doors, and the part his friend had played all along. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the world tilting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Shock, disbelief, and relief collided in a confusing storm of emotion. I could barely process the weight of the revelation. Every assumption I had made, every fear, every sleepless night, it all needed to be reassessed. "I never wanted you to feel like I was choosing anyone over you," he said, eyes pleading for understanding. I didn't know how to navigate this without losing everything." His hands shook slightly as he reached for mine, and I felt the tension of the past days pulse through his fingers. We sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. The storm hadn't disappeared, it had merely shifted. But now, instead of confusion and fear, there was clarity, painful and sudden. The path forward would not be easy. Decisions still needed to be made, boundaries established, and trust rebuilt. But at least now, the hidden truths were laid bare. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. The wedding was still fragile, still uncertain, but the shadows that had haunted us were illuminated. And with that illumination came the chance to finally confront what truly mattered. Love, loyalty, and honesty, the pillars we would have to lean on to survive the week that remained before everything changed forever. After the revelation, I couldn't stop thinking. The apartment was silent, but my mind raced like a storm. Every detail, every word he had just confessed, replayed over and over. I could feel the tension of the past days easing slightly, but underneath, a new weight settled, a responsibility to navigate what came next with care, intelligence, and, most importantly, honesty. I thought about the wedding, the plans, the people we had invited, and how fragile everything had become. Now that the truth was out, I realized that we could no longer pretend, could no longer ignore the undercurrents that had threatened to tear us apart. We needed a plan, not just to survive the next week, but to preserve our relationship, our love, and the trust we had painstakingly built. I considered his family first. They were still a force to be reckoned with, their expectations rigid, their influence undeniable. But armed with the truth, perhaps there was a way to appeal to reason, to show them that their ultimatum had been based on incomplete information. Perhaps a calm, honest conversation could begin to dismantle the tension. Then there was his friend. The revelation had shifted the dynamic. Yes, but the bond they shared remained strong. How could we honor that friendship without triggering further conflict? Could he set boundaries while still maintaining loyalty, without sacrificing the wedding or our relationship? Every option seemed risky, every choice delicate, and me. I had to confront my own fears. Could I remain patient, supportive, and loving without letting frustration and anxiety take over? Could I be the anchor for him when he was adrift in a sea of pressure and expectation? I clenched my fists, determined. I had to. The coming days would test us both, and I wasn't about to let fear dictate our future. We talked long into the night, weighing possibilities, imagining conversations, preparing for every potential outcome. Every plan was tentative, every strategy a fragile thread. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of control, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we could navigate this impossible week together by the time I finally closed my eyes. Exhaustion overtaking me, I felt a quiet resolve settle in my chest. The storm hadn't passed, the challenges weren't gone, but we had clarity, honesty, and each other. And for now, that was enough to keep hope alive. The morning of the final meeting arrived with an almost unbearable weight. The apartment felt charged, as if the walls themselves were aware of the storm that had been brewing all week. I could see it in his eyes, determination tempered by exhaustion, anxiety, and the lingering fear of disappointing everyone. That we arrived at his parents' house together, hand in hand, hearts pounding in synchrony. The tension was palpable. His parents sat rigidly, expressions unreadable. I could feel their skepticism before a single word was spoken. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and began. "I need to be honest," he said, voice steady but firm. "There's been a lot you didn't know, and I've had to make choices that were impossible. I've realized that loyalty, love, and honesty matter more than fear. I cannot betray my friend, and I cannot hide the truth from you. But I also cannot let this destroy my relationship or our future." His mother's eyes narrowed, his father's jaw clenched, and I felt my own heartbeat accelerate. The room seemed to shrink around us, every breath heavy with expectation. But then, slowly, he explained the entire situation. The misunderstandings, the past secrets, the friend's role, and the choices he had been forced to consider. By the end, there was silence. A long, tense pause that stretched unbearably. I held my breath, gripping his hand, praying that some semblance of reason and understanding would emerge. And then, his father exhaled sharply, tension easing just slightly. "I see," he muttered, words simple but heavy with the weight of grudging acceptance. His mother's expression softened as well, though her eyes still held caution that it wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete forgiveness or total understanding, but it was enough. Enough for us to move forward, to salvage what the week's chaos had threatened to destroy. My fiancé exhaled, relief flickering in his eyes, and I felt my own tension melt slightly. We left the house hand in hand, hearts lighter but still aware of the delicate balance we had achieved. The wedding was no longer a ticking time bomb. It was a choice, a conscious, deliberate act of love despite the obstacles. We had faced the storm, confronted every fear, every ultimatum, every impossible decision, and we had survived. Together. As we walked back, I realized that the past week had changed us, not weakened us, but strengthened. Our love had been tested in ways I never could have imagined, and while scars remained, so did resilience, courage, and a shared understanding that no external pressure could break the bond we had built. The wedding was no longer just a celebration. It was a testament to endurance, loyalty, and the power of choosing love when everything else demanded compromise. And in that quiet moment, I finally allowed myself to hope that, no matter what came next, we could face it together, stronger than ever.